Basically, this is going to be kind of an overall introduction to JavaScript and the library that we use here at NextJump, which is called Prototype.js. So this was difficult to go through and kind of put a comprehensive overview because there's so many things I could cover. But just kind of see if I'm in the right ballpark. I guess by a show of hands, who has advanced JavaScript experience? All right, we got one. Are you a Nuge by any chance? I'm gonna say yes. Okay. So what about Medium? If Josh, cool. Cindy, awesome. So if I said things what are objects in JavaScript or what are classes in JavaScript, would people know the answer to that off the top of their head? It is a trick question, so he knows it way better. Okay, so we're gonna go through it. Hopefully, you'll find some value from this by the end. We're just going to go through kind of a live coding problem, which I think will be a lot of fun with a JS fiddle. So to start, we're going to start super basically, what is JavaScript? I know a lot of people are kind of more back-end people, kind of used to more Java, C, that sort of thing. So basically, JavaScript is actually client-side scripts that runs in your browser. So this allows you to interact with the actual front end of the web page and allows us to do really interactive things on the website that we can do with the user, things that you can't do with PHP. JavaScript also actually can be on the back end on the server side, but that's something we won't get into today. So basically, the main thing that's really useful to understand for why we use libraries like Prototype.js is basically the DOM, the document object model. So are people familiar with this? Cool. So basically, if you think of your HTML, all the HTML is a tree, and it has a tree structure. So you can see this HTML over here, and it's super basic. We just have HTML, body, and we have a div with an ID container. And to the right, you can see how this is visualized as a tree structure. Basically, what we're going to get into is a lot of the power of Prototype comes in where we're able to access different nodes within the tree of the HTML, and we can modify it and do that sort of stuff with it. So that's really where this technology comes in handy. A lot of times we'll be doing something where a user will do an action and will change the appearance of the website based on it. So from here, we understand our kind of basic structure. There's a hierarchy. Things are nodes. It should look like your trees and your standard, CS, graph theory type stuff. So Prototype basically allows us to select nodes in the tree. So you can do this with vanilla JavaScript. It's just a little bit more complicated. So you can see this document.getElement by ID. So that the whole thing is under this document node, and so that's where it's starting from. And in Prototype, we can do just dollar quotes thing to access the nodes. We can also do the same thing for classes, and we can do different attributes. So I am just going to quickly demo how that kind of works. So are you guys familiar with Firebug? Have you used Firebug before? So basically, Firebug is an awesome dev tools, a dev tool for Firefox, which basically allows you to play with the result in real time. So what we're going to do now is we're going to find some sort of thing. This is NextJump's homepage right now, and so you can see all the front end code. And I want to find something that's going to be easy to get. So I think this header might be pretty easy to get. So it has a div ID top bar. So if we copy that, we can go into our console, and this is where we can actually interact with it with JavaScript and Prototype and try things right from here. So when we're accessing just that node in Prototype, it goes like this. And so you can see that it gives us a result of this div, and you can see what's in it. What's awesome about Firebug is that if we actually hit dot, it will auto-complete for us the different stuff we can actually do to it. So I mentioned how we can look at the different attributes of nodes within the DOM. So if I just start typing, you see we have an attributes thing, and it gives us an associative array. It says that this HTML node has a class, global top bar, and an ID top bar. We can do the same thing for things that have classes. I don't know if we had anything with a class. Cool, nav supercat. Sure, we can take this. And so how many of you guys have used like jQuery before? I'm sure a few. Awesome. Okay, so basically Prototype is going to look super similar to jQuery. The syntax is just going to be slightly different. So you might have noticed that for the first thing, just grabbing by an ID, with jQuery you would use a pound, and it would actually return to you an array of just one element, which personally drives me crazy because there's no reason for it to be an array because IDs are supposed to be unique. You can actually do this. I thought you could do the same thing in Prototype. Maybe you can't. Okay, never mind about that. But we can do a class. We can grab a class by doing a double $sign, and then we actually use the dot before the name, just like you're used to in maybe CSS. And this will give us an array of all of these different nodes, and so we can play with them. Yeah, go for it. Yes, I will try. Yeah, feel free to interrupt me with any questions. Let's see. Let's see. Zoom in. Oh, that was just the web page. All right. Who's really good at Firebug settings and knows how to make this bigger? Yeah, see, that's just the web. Oh, actually, no, that's what? Okay, so we've done the opposite now. Let me refresh it. It looks like I can zoom out. Oh, and we have like permanently zoomed out. This is unfortunate. Okay, 0, Firebug. Say it again. Yeah, that's right, like a pinch. Yeah, I tried that. So command. Oh, I bet it's Command Shift plus. Nope. Wow, that's really frustrating. Okay, well, let's open up a new window. Make that full screen. Let's see what our Firebug looks like here. Damn it. Okay, I think I got Firebug, okay, to be better, or back to normal at least. Alright, so I think that we might have to deal with just the... Is this back to normal? Okay, is this... Okay. It's higher now. So let's just go back to where we are, see if this is... Okay, can we kind of see that? Feel free to come closer too. Yeah. Oh, cool. Yeah. Oh, I should put this. Oh, text size though. Increase text. There we go. Thank you for the win. It apparently says it's Apple Plus too. That's the funny thing. Okay. Great. All right. How do we feel about this text size? Better? Sweet. Okay. So moving on. So let's see. We looked at attributes. Oh, just one more thing I could mention about attributes. So as we can see, this is an array for this classes. So if we do the 0 position, we'll get the first node in the array, and then we can look at its attributes. And then from that, basically it's an associative array. So we can say, oh, I just want the href. And if we do a dot value, that'll actually give us just the value of it itself. So what's really cool about this is that we can access all these different nodes and their different attributes, and then the next part that's cool is that we can actually modify them. So they're basically some of the most powerful things are adding class names and removing class names. So let's go back to this first thing. So this, you can see, is this eating tab right here. And so we can do a remove class name. And our class name is what? Nav Supercat? Nav Supercat. So that should remove class name. Let's see if that worked. Class Nav Supercat. Dot remove class name. There we go. So the class is now gone. Oh, I see what happened. So there's so that specific class wasn't associated with the styling. So now when I went to the 0 position, we're now on the travel tab instead of the eating because it lost that class name. What we can do is we can add random classes too. So if, say, we had styles associated with these new classes, we can basically change things dynamically. So add class name. And so I'm just going to make something up like blah, right? And then, so now you can see this auto thing right here. If we actually inspect it in Firebug, you can see that it now has this class blah. And so we can basically have different styles associated with it and change things dynamically that way. The next really powerful thing is that we can just edit any sort of HTML inside it. So this is really great if you, basically a user needs an action and you want a response to change things. So we'll stick to where we are, and it's .inner HTML equals, and then we can just change it. So now we've just changed the nav bar right there to say blah. We can change the internal text of it, and we can do whatever we want. We can add HTML in it too. So say we wanted to do something random like add an input box. So we can add HTML dynamically to these different nodes, and so that's really the kind of the power of Prototype that we do. Same thing, we can access form values, so we can submit all our forms dynamically. Basically, similar to the attributes, it's kind of just a dot value when you access it. So moving on. Oh, cool. So the next really cool thing is actually adding events to different nodes. So what we can do is we can actually add actions to any of this sort of HTML. Common things are, when you click them, when you change them, that sort of thing. So let me just pull up the syntax for this. So I just feel like retyping it. So let's find an ID before. I think we had that top bar right. Oop. No. Still no. All lowercase, thank you. So we have this right here, which currently does nothing. But what we can do is we can actually attach an event to it. So in Prototype, this is basically the syntax. It's .observe, which is saying we're going to observe some action, and then we're going to have a function to do something. So we'll just close that, and then so we can say like we want it to alert. So now when I click on this top bar, we get an action that happens. So basically this allows us to take, you might be used to kind of the old way in HTML where you would have specific attributes that say like on click, on hover, that sort of thing. But the much better way to do it is actually use your JavaScript to attach all of these event handlers to nodes. And so these are some of the common ones. On key down, if you ever see something like live searches, that's what they're doing, is as they're typing keys, you have JavaScript that's attached a function to this, and it's able to pull a response from somewhere and then do something with it, and then add it to the actual HTML values. And apparently on to the next slide. Cool. So the next thing I want to talk about is design patterns in JavaScript. So is anyone here familiar with any JavaScript design patterns, or really the concept of what a design pattern is? Cool. So that's awesome. So basically, design patterns are basically reusable solutions to commonly occurring problems. Basically, you have a community of developers that have work to solve these problems, and they're able to structure code in certain standardized ways that make it easier for everyone to understand when you're looking at someone else's code. And basically, they provide a common vocabulary to describe solutions to problems. So two really great resources that I love. This guy, Adi Osmani, wrote this book, Essential JavaScript Design Patterns, which is completely free and on his GitHub. And so that's where a lot of the next couple slides are going to come from. And then this other guy wrote a lot of, on his GitHub, has really cool just kind of general JavaScript, like anti-patterns and patterns, kind of like do's and don'ts. So going to the next thing, we're basically going to talk about that. So for example, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with for loops. So this is kind of a common thing that people will do, is that when I is less than the length, they'll calculate my array.length right within the loop. The problem with this is that it has to recalculate the length of the array every single time. So really the correct optimization to this is to cache the length. So what you can do is right within the loop here, after you declare I, you can also declare a max variable. So now it only has to calculate the length once, and then it's signed to max, and then I can compare to max. So that greatly optimizes it already. Another kind of anti-pattern that if you've written a little JavaScript you might be really used to is declaring our functions just function name. So this is actually not the best way to declare functions. What's much preferred is actually to use var get data equals function. And what this does is it's much more obvious that these functions are actually objects, which is what we're using in JavaScript. And other small things like it enforces good semicolon habits, but basically it's more readable, and this is kind of the better way to declare your functions. And then on the next note, cool, classes. So kind of what Josh alluded to before, basically it's kind of a trick question because JavaScript actually does not have any classes. So we're used to things like Java or C, where we're used to these classes, car, whatever, which have public and private methods and variables, but JavaScript actually has no classes. Instead, what we do is we simulate classes by using objects. So this is a very traditional method of creating a class in JavaScript using objects. As you can see, it's already using the anti-pattern of just declaring function, and all the variables, you can do this, which refers to the instantiation of that specific object, to define variables and functions, and then we can actually create it, by saying new car, that sort of thing. So this is a good way to kind of understand how JavaScript objects can be used to simulate classes, but is not our preferred pattern of actually writing them. So that's what I'm going to get into now, which is the fun part. So basically, this hopefully will look more familiar to you if you're used to Java or C. Basically, this allows us to further emulate classes by having public, private methods and variables. So it's called, this specifically is called a revealing module pattern. And this is what we try to use on our site. So this starts with the pattern of declaring the object of var equal to a function. Basically, these double parentheses at the end means that it's basically going to only be instantiated by itself once. Like, we don't have to say new revealing module pattern. This will actually happen on its own. And what this does is allows us to actually have public and private methods and variables, which we can't have before with the standard constructor pattern. So the way we do that is we can declare our functions, our variables within it. And then what we do is we create these pointers specifically to what we want to have access to the public. So for example, as you can see in this example that I took from that book, the set name is public because we, right down here, we can just say set name colon, pointer to that specific function. And so you can't access the individual variables, but you can have getters and setters and that sort of, standard good Java stuff. It also is really useful in this concept of closures in JavaScript. Basically now, this is going to avoid naming conflicts. So you can have, whatever, you can have a get name function or whatever, and if it's private, then another module that also has a get name function, those won't interfere now. As long as you only make the public things what you want to have public, it allows you to avoid conflicts with other developers who might write similar names. So kind of on that note, I want to kind of take what we've kind of put together so far and basically go through an example of how we would use this pattern to build something that I used to have to build constantly, which is if you're used to, let me just pull it up. If you're used to a forms on most websites, what'll happen is it'll have some sort of default placeholder text that's grayed out. You'll click it, it'll go away. You can type in it, you can click out, and then if you delete it and click out again, then it'll come back. So this is basically really useful functionality that I've had to write a million times, and so it's way better to be able to have one thing that does it and can attach to all our forms. So for those of you who have computers, if you want to go to this JS fiddle, I'll leave it up there, and just let me know when you get to it. And this will basically have this thing empty, and then we can just kind of go together and talk out the logic and try to code this. So just let me know, people with computers, when you're good. Any questions so far, by the way? Went through a lot of that kind of fast. Hopefully a lot of it will come a little bit more clear as we go through these exercises. I know some people probably have much more advanced experience as well. Cool. All right, so are we people with computers have the fiddle up? Jinx, Cindy, cool. Boston. Awesome. All right, cool. So let's go ahead and we can basically start coding this. So, something I should point out, this is basically this top section right here is how we normally call our module patterns. So basically, a common function in programming is an init function, and this is just adding to kind of a global NXJ object. So we can have different modules a part of that. And so this is that event handler we talked about with Prototype before, adding clicks. What this does is it waits for all the HTML, the entire DOM to load. After that, it'll run the JavaScript. Because basically the HTML has to exist before the JavaScript can access it. So a lot of times this can be kind of a common problem. If your HTML isn't loaded yet, your JavaScript tries to access something that doesn't exist. So basically to call this whole thing, so what this thing will do is it will take any input box that's on a page with the class nxj underscore input, and it will take this attribute that we added, data-placeholder, and it'll add that as a placeholder, and it'll attach the correct actions on it to be able to click in it and click out of it with this default text. So this is really great. What we use a lot is we have these type of functions that run in our header.js, which is called on every single page. So you can have these UI library elements, and it automatically attaches all the styles and functionality you need to them. If anyone's used like Bootstrap, this is how Bootstrap works. So let's get started. In our init function, from this, does anyone know what we would first need to do, or what we need to think about? I kind of broke it down into 3 functions that I think are the important ones. You can see kind of the result right here, slightly restyled, just a form, but there's nothing in it. There's no placeholder yet. So, anyone have any ideas? Shout them out. Is that a hand in Boston?
Yeah, you're gonna have to try the microphone, Boston.
If you have any thoughts. Yeah, exactly. So how would we do that? Yep. Awesome. So let's say we have an input array, and we can grab it in Prototype by its $$ class, and we're calling it nxj input. So this, cool. So what this is going to do is give us an array of, this is going to give us an array of all the inputs. So another typo. So once we have that, so now we have an array. I don't know what we think we should do next. Loop through them, exactly. So we can talk about kind of our design pattern before for var I, and then we can do we can make another variable. Max is equal to whatever it's called, input array dot length. Plus plus. Cool. So basically, what this function will allow us to do is loop through all of our inputs. Did I miss something?
Yes. Yeah.
Ah, thank you. I see one thing. I is less than max. I instantiate I. Oh, not equal to 0. There we go. This is why we're pair programming.
Yeah.
Cool. So I is equal to 0, and max is equal to the length. I is less than max. I plus plus. People use this kind of, it's kind of tricky notation, but the I plus plus. Same thing as I is equal to I plus 1. You can do that in JavaScript. You can do the same thing. You can do I minus minus. There's some things that are a little tricky where I plus plus and plus plus I are actually different, but we won't get into that right now. If you want to not be super tricky, you can just do I is equal to I plus 1. So this will allow us to go through. And so we can see that we have these two functions, populate placeholder and attach events. So the first thing we're trying to do right now is just attach or to add the actual placeholder to it when we load it. So we can just call our function from here. And this is a good example of public and private functions right here, because the bottom, we're only going to be able to call this init function, but no one else is going to be able to have access to populating the placeholder, so that these things will only be called first on page load to populate all the placeholders. What we want to do is we want to put, we want to pass the actual element into this function, which is, it's an array, right? So input array of I. Cool, all look good. And so why don't we just, do some testing already? And so we'll just say alert element, run this, and nothing happened, which makes me feel like we have an error. Thank you. No, that's right. It's because it's doing the max as well. I plus plus, populate placeholder, input array of I. Oh, my JavaScript is valid. Okay. Function downloaded. We get the right class, MXJ input. So let's try to debug even earlier on. Say it again. You say redefine. It should be, so since we defined it down here, we should be able to access it within here. Kind of that scope concept. DOM-loaded function, external resources, make sure we have prototype and such loaded. That's also a possibility. So let's go even do more debugging. Let's see if this thing's even being called at all. Okay, that's concerning. Function, frameworks and extensions. This makes me think that prototype isn't being called. JS Fiddle. What are you doing? Prototype, external resources. I've also been told that what your error messages say a lot about you or how late it is. Okay, so I feel like Prototype's not being loaded for some reason, but I'm not positive. That would be my guess. What we could do is go to my working example and just see. Downloaded Prototype. Ah, like that. Maybe that's it. Okay, cool. So now we're getting Prototype to load, and we have all our stuff. So basically, that was just equivalent to declaring the library in the head of your HTML for the actual Prototype library. A note that I should mention too is that like you on our actual site, you won't have to worry about including any of the libraries Prototype. They're all automatically loaded on every page already. Normally, if you I think Costa might talk about how CSS works. JavaScript works the same way, where you can have one file that will apply to the whole controller, a JavaScript.js file named accordingly. But we can also put JavaScript within our partials and include them manually. We have different things that are kind of portable. Cool. So let's get rid of these alerts. Run this. Still another alert. Cool. Okay, so we're here. Okay, awesome. So now we just need to populate this input box. So there's a function that I didn't talk about, so that I'll just point it out now, which is this is always the way I like to test things, which is has attribute. Cool, has attribute. So, oops. So this will tell us true or false if something has an attribute. So we can test to see if top par has an ID, has attributes as true. So basically what we want to avoid is we don't want to try to assign a value to this input if someone has forgotten to actually give it an attribute. So we can use element, has attribute, data placeholder. And then we should be able to say like element value is equal to element dot. So then this is the kind of tricky part. Attributes of data placeholder dot value. Cool. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to set the value of this input to be the value of whatever the data placeholder is. This allows us to not hard code things. So basically, this is a great way to keep things as consistent as possible, having these attributes within our HTML that are called things like data placeholder. So we can keep things consistent that way and not hard code anything within the actual JavaScript. So let's see if this works. Awesome. So this allows us to start with this placeholder, but the problem is it looks like this is standard input right now. This doesn't actually look like it is a placeholder. So can anyone think of like how we would make this look more like a placeholder? If you remember the screenshot of the answer before, it might kind of give it away. So exactly, like so in this case we have a class that's called placeholder. So if we look at our CSS, we have a placeholder class right here that basically allows us to have change the color of it. So what we can also do here is say add class name. Cool. So now when this initially loads, it takes this placeholder text, and we have a kind of a grayed out version that shows it's like a placeholder. I think maybe in the interest of time, I'll just kind of go over the kind of what the attach events look like in the answer. But basically, you can imagine what we want it to do is we want to be able to click in here, and we want this thing just to disappear. And when we type, we don't want it to be gray anymore. So if we look at the kind of answer fiddle, we have this other function. So you can see how that works. Changes the class. We click out of it. It goes back. And so back to our loop, we do two main things. We populate the placeholder, and we attach events to our actual nodes. So under the attach events, there's two events that you may or may not be familiar with, but that are really useful for this: blur and focus. So focus happens when we click inside it. It's different than on-click because we only want it when it's for input elements where we actually are giving it focus, where we're like about to type into it. We don't just want it to happen whenever it's clicked. So in our attach events, we're able to basically say, if the value of this thing is equal to the placeholder value, then we want to change the value to nothing. So what we don't want to happen is if I start typing something and I type out and then I click back in, we don't want that to disappear again in case I was in the middle of typing, went away from it, and came back. So that's why we have that check there. And so the main things to do are, make it blank and then remove the class name placeholder, so we just have a normal formatting for it now. So that's what we need to do when we click in. Then we need something where we actually click out. When we click out, basically basically the same thinking but the opposite. If the thing is blank, so someone's deleted the whole. Oh, wrong place. Someone's deleted the whole thing. Again, wrong place. Okay, this thing hates me. Anyway, so you can imagine, I'll rerun this. So we delete the whole thing and click out. We want the placeholder to appear again. So we check to see if the value is equal to nothing. And then we add the class name back to placeholder, and then we basically do the same thing. On retrospect, I bet here, instead of this thing, we're already kind of repeating code from over here, so we might actually have been able just to call the populate placeholder function again instead of rewriting all of this. That might have made it a little bit better. But anyway, so that's basically kind of like how we would write this kind of JavaScript to be able to attach this formatting and events, this functionality to all common UI elements. So go back to the slideshow. Basically what this really is, it's kind of the backbone of front-end frameworks. And so front-end frameworks are absolutely awesome because when I first came here, I built everything from scratch and thought it was awesome that I could build things from scratch. And it is awesome, but it gets old really quickly when you're constantly building the same thing over and over again. So really what we have a effort to do here is we have this thing we call a UI library. So basically, whenever you're going to build something on the front end, you should check out the UI library first to see if it already exists. So this exact thing that I was talking about, inputs, already exist, where we have input boxes, sort delayed, and it does all the things. How we want all form elements to behave. We have things like date pickers, scroll bars, all this type of stuff for forms, wow points, coins, which we use constantly, sliders. So basically what this is just a tool set for you to be able to pull all these things and be able to help you build things faster. So that's just /UI library. And that's basically the most useful thing that we've had recently. Love for you guys to ask me any questions you have about any of this. I know I went fast. I know this might have been over some people's heads, under some people's heads too. So yeah, thanks guys. Any questions? Yeah, Cindy. So the reason so basically you are
John, can
select.
you repeat the question?
Yeah. So she asked about the double dollar sign in prototype and why it's returning an array. So the reason is because if in HTML, if you have a class, you can have a class on multiple items, where an ID you can only have on one item. So the double dollar sign gives you an array of all of the elements with that same class name. And so then that allows you to do things like navigation bars where there's a bunch of them, to iterate through all of them, or what we were doing, all text boxes on the web page to go through all of them and attach individual things to it. Anything else? I know we didn't discuss things like Ajax. Basically, Prototype also makes it really easy to do Ajax in the same way jQuery does. So you can call a controller method, get a response, and then do something with it in JavaScript. If you have any other questions after this, feel free to follow up with me as well.
John, can I add something about the Ajax real quick?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh yeah, get and post.
Yeah.
for
So
it.
if anybody uses jQuery and is familiar with the Ajax methods in jQuery, if you don't specify your request method in jQuery, it's going to default to a get, which is normally what you want. Prototype's backwards. If you don't specify your request method, it's going to default to post, which is probably not what you want, especially if you try to start constructing your URLs. Just like appending strings together to make your URLs. If you try to request it as a post, things are going to get messed up. And for security reasons, we have to do something special with post requests, which I will get to in my course next Tuesday.
Shameless plug.
Shameless plug. But yeah, so just be aware that the request method's backwards by default in Prototype.
Yeah, are you guys familiar with the difference between get and post? Like basically in the RESTful API sense, post you're pushing something, you're making a change. Get, you're just receiving something back. So if we were going to do like an autocomplete, you would want to get to actually get the different options like names, whatever, and then a post if you actually want to change data, make inserts to the database, do a post. Other questions, guys? All right, cool. Well, I will send out my slides and like the JS fiddle, and feel free to come up to me if you have any questions about JavaScript or really any front end stuff in general. It's kind of my specialty here, and also you should use the grid, which I can explain to you as well. It's another kind of more of the front end framework type stuff. But cool, thanks guys.